All right, I have a little time before I have to get set up for tonight's stream. I decided to get the paperback version of this, And Into the Fire by Rodney Atkinson. I keep calling him Roland, so every time I try to look for him, I'd be like, why can't I ever find this guy's name? Now, it's still very difficult to find. Now, a lot of this information was presented to Parliament, the British Parliament, many, many years ago. I think 2010 or 2011. So as things are getting kind of not so comfortable with the EU and Britain, this guy presented, well, this is why the EU acts the way it does. So I thought I would make sure to read from this one particularly interesting chapter, because there's all these people, especially the political left in the Western world, the Anglosphere, the Eurosphere in general, but really I mean the Anglosphere. So especially you get this from a lot of American left people who they desperately and breathlessly try to claim that they're well-read and that they're real smart people. For one, when it comes to everything going on with the present virus, don't trust people who aren't in good shape. So this is Sam Cedar, the Young Turks, Ring of Fire guy. Don't trust these people. They're built like a bag of crap, or they're skin and bones. Tom Hartman, Scrawnster. Don't trust these people. They don't know much about health, really, obviously. And so, because high performance is high performance is high performance, and nobody on the running path in Eugene, outside of the people who obviously are kind of the weirdo end of runners, were wearing masks and stuff. They just don't. They were never wearing masks. Because they're high performance, and they know I don't need to wear this mask outdoors, because they understand that viruses can't survive outdoors very well, especially in summertime. Anyway, that's beside the point. You only really know a political institution by the kind of people who support it. By that measure alone, the Nazi and fascist nature of the European Union is difficult to deny. I set out here the names of prominent Nazis and fascists of the 1930s and 1940s who then became prominent political figures of European countries and were intimately involved in creating the European structures which rule us today under the name of the European Union. So these are the people who are political and lawyers and intellectuals who never hung. And so there's a lot of this realm of intellectuals that are these really bad people who want to do bad things to normal people. And especially the American left never questions it, because they're like, well, it's an intellectual. And PBS really likes them. The BBC really likes them. Some Deutsche Welle really loves this person. They're the bee's knees in France. They wrote some book that has very insubstantial points. Some became leaders of EU institutions, others became renowned as EU founding fathers. Walter Hallstein. Hallstein was State Secretary of Foreign Affairs under Adenauer. He established the Hallstein Doctrine, which denied diplomatic recognition to those states that recognized East Germany. He was a member of many leading Nazi organizations, the most significant of which were the National Socialist University Lecturers Association, Dozentenbund, where he qualified as a Nazi leadership officer, enabling him to join the army as an officer in 1942, and the National Socialist League for Protection of the Law, Rechtswaherbund. Such organizations were not like being forced to be a member of the Nazi Party. They were central cadres of Nazi rule, to which only the most committed would have been admitted. The French President General de Gaulle summed him up: if Dr. Hallstein is a convinced European, it is because he is first and foremost an ambitious German. From Memories of Hope, 1970. His ambition during the Nazi period was evident from his intimate involvement in the preservation of Nazi doctrines in universities and the promotion of Nazism in German law. Walter Hallstein became the first president of the EEC Commission, the European Economic Community, Commission in 1958. Heinz Twelschler von Falkenstein, 134 of von Ribbentrop's Foreign Office civil servants served under Adenauer after 1949. Heinz Twelschler von Falkenstein, appointed by Hitler as secretary of his Europe Committee, was chosen by Adenauer in 1949 for a similar job as director of the European Division of the West German Foreign Office, leading the negotiations for the founding European Economic Community in 1958. Paul Henri Spaak joined the Belgian national government as foreign minister in 1936, and with Henri de Man developed the Belgian National Socialist Party. One of his notable acts was to refuse assistance to the legal Spanish Republican government, then locked in civil war with Franco's fascists. In 1938, Spaak said, "Some people wish to lead us into a policy of solidarity with the democracies against the fascist states. I refuse to stick to such a policy." He concluded, if Great Britain and France want to help Czechoslovakia by invading Germany through Belgium, they will be treated as invaders. In fact, as the memoirs of Sir Alexander Cadogan, the pre-war British cabinet minister, note, that is exactly how the British forces seeking to defend Belgium against the invading Nazis were treated. Spaak declared that it was wrong to consider fascist movements as reactionary because in reality they play a revolutionary role. Paul Henri Spaak became one of the EU's founding fathers and Secretary General of NATO. Walter Funk. Funk joined the Nazi Party in 1931 and promptly became not only Hitler's personal economic advisor, he was also Reich press chief, minister under Goebbels at the propaganda ministry, and finally became the Reich's economic minister in 1938. He was liaison man between the Nazi Party and the large industrialists, from whom he obtained financial and political support on Hitler's behalf. On 3rd of December 1938, Funk again advanced the policy of economic extermination by signing a decree which proved that owners of Jewish enterprises could be ordered to sell or liquidate their enterprises. Jews could be ordered to sell and were prohibited from acquiring any real estate. Jews were forced to deposit all stocks, mining shares, bonds, and other securities with specially designated banks, and accounts had to be marked Jewish. Funk was convicted at Nuremberg trials, and on his release in 1957, he was employed by the Lower Saxony Education Ministry, where he helped to propagate the new European Economic Community to German schools and universities. Although Funk died in 1960, his blueprint for the European Economic Community drawn up by the Nazis in Berlin in 1941 is virtually indistinguishable from the structure of today's European Union. Alcide de Gasperi. Now, so Alcide, I'm presuming I'm pronouncing it right. The then journalist de Gasperi belonged to that Catholic world of the early days of the Mussolini regime with which the Italian fascists collaborated and maintained close contact. On the day Mussolini came to power, lorries full of nuns paraded through the streets of Rome, giving the fascist salute, which gives an indication of the attitude of the Vatican, in which de Gasperi worked in the 1930s. He was a librarian in the Vatican, as it became the first state to recognize the Nazi regime and signed its notorious 1934 Concordat with Nazi Germany. That pact gave the Vatican direct access to German schools and neutralized the opposition to Hitler from the Catholic Center Party. Even during the Nazi occupation, de Gasperi was involved in intrigues against parts of the resistance in order to break up left-wing Catholicism and communist partisans. After becoming Italian president in December 1945, de Gasperi pleaded for an end to the criminal prosecution of many Mussolini supporters. But such attitudes did not prevent him from being one of the founding fathers of the European Union. Hans Josef Goebbels. By now you will have gathered that most of the Nazi functionaries continued in public life, either as officials or as politicians. Dr. Adenauer, Germany's post-war chancellor, appointed Globke as his state secretary, that is, director of the chancellor's office in Bonn. Globke was the man who had drafted the Nuremberg race laws. It was on Globke's advice that Adenauer made his senior appointments. Hans Josef Maria Globke was born in Dusseldorf to Josef and Sophie Erberich Globke, both devout Roman Catholics. During his study, he was a member of Katholisch Deutsche Studentenverbindung, Bonn, which was the local chapter of the Kartellverband der Katholischen Deutschen Studentenverbindungen. He helped to formulate the emergency legislation that gave Hitler unlimited dictatorial powers. He also wrote a law commentary on the new Reich citizenship law, the Nuremberg laws, introduced at Hitler's request at the Nazi Party Congress in September 1935, revoking the citizenship of German Jews. Reinventing himself as a post-war Democrat, he was director of the Federal Chancellery of West Germany between 1953 and 1963, and as such was one of the closest aides to Federal Chancellor Konrad Adenauer during the plans for and the foundation of the European Union. Globke's key position as a national security advisor to Adenauer and his involvement in anti-communist activities in post-war West Germany made both the West German government and the CIA officials wary of exposing his Nazi past. This led, for instance, to the withholding of Adolf Eichmann's alias from the Israeli government and Nazi hunters in the late 50s, and CIA pressure in 1960 on Life magazine to delete references to Globke from its recently obtained Eichmann memoirs. This kind of censorship of history might have been excusable at the height of the Cold War in defense of Europe against the Soviet communist menace. Since 1989, there is no such excuse for not exposing the fascist and Nazi elements who constructed the European Union, which rules over 27 countries of Europe. Hans Dietrich Genscher. In 1945, he became a member of the Nazi Party at the age of 18. According to Genscher's statements, this happened through a collective application in his Wehrmacht unit and against his own intentions. As leader of the FDP, which participated, thanks to the German proportional representation voting system in most governments of West Germany, Genscher was the most influential German foreign secretary in the post-war era. He served as foreign minister and vice chancellor of Germany from 1974 to 1982, and after a 2-week pause from 1982 to 1992, making him Germany's longest-serving foreign minister and vice chancellor. He was responsible for Germany's undermining of Yugoslavia throughout the 70s and 80s, which bore fruit with Croatia's breakaway in 1991 and its recognition by Germany. See the chapter on Croatia below. As David Owen notes, his party attracted disproportionate support from Croats who lived in Germany. Theodor Heuss, former designer of concentration camps and supplier of slave labor to the V2 project, as Tom Bauer in his book Blind Eye to Murder testifies, Heuss voted for the infamous Enabling Act in 1933 that gave the Nazis the power to override both houses of parliament, the source of Hitler's absolute power. Theodor Heuss became federal president of Germany in 1949. And because I got to get started for the stream, let's get into one more. Heinrich Höhnke joined the Nazi Party as early as 1923, and from 1924 to 1925 he was Kreisleiter, district leader of the National Socialist Freedom Party in Lippe, the party set up after the NSDAP had been banned. In 1923, he again joined the re-established NSDAP as member number 273 and became district economics advisor for Greater Berlin, a post he held until 1945. In 1923, he wrote a paper recommending the nationalization of the big banks, demonstrating the fundamentally socialist nature of Nazism. In 1931, he became director of Die Deutsche Volkswirtschaft, Zeitschrift für Nationalsozialistische Wirtschaftsgestaltung, the German Economy, the Journal of Economic Planning for National Socialism, which, with a few gaps, he edited until 1945. Goebbels promoted him in the party and got him into the Reichstag for the Nazis. Hitler appointed him principal lecturer for the supervision of the whole intellectual and philosophical education of the Nazi Party from 1934 to 1945. He was honorary professor for economics from 1935 at the Technical University in Berlin, and then ministerial director in the Reich's Ministry for Propaganda, where he became a departmental director in 1941, and from 1942 chairman of the Committee for Foreign Propaganda and Radio. Hunke was a leading member of the Society for European Economic Planning and Imperial Economy, which planned the whole of continental Europe's economy under German control. He also founded an Institute for European Rahmenplanung, or Rahmenordnung, a concept taken up by the EU, meaning large-scale regional and cross-border planning. Rahmenordnung. There we go. From 1942 to 1945, he was a member of the Nazi Party's Banking Committee, responsible for the policy of dispossessing Jews of their property. In 1942, he was a major contributor to the Nazi publication, the European Economic Community. So that's an important one. The newspaper of the Nazis, their economic newspaper, was the European Economic Community, the EEC. That's the name prior to the EU. Many people are too young to remember this. I'm old enough to remember that. A compilation of speeches by leading Nazi academics and businessmen at a Berlin conference which Hunke organized, and whose conclusions form the structure and basic economic policies of the European Union today. In July 1945, Hunke was captured by the Allies, spending 3 years in U.S. internment camps, and in March 1950, in the denazification process, despite his record as the leading Nazi academic ideologue, he was categorized merely as fellow traveler, Mitläufer, or Mitläufer. In 1955, I love fellow travelers, one of those words that comes up so much. In 1955, he became a member of the Lower Saxony State Parliament and became from 1955 to 1967 a civil servant in the Lower Saxony Finance Ministry, where he rose to be ministerial dirigent, one of the highest ranks in the civil service. As a leading academic in Germany for 60 years, writing up to the 1980s, and a most senior civil servant promoting the European Union, Hunke must have influenced or controlled the future of thousands of students and government employees. The British Secret Service thought he was a member of the Naumann Circle, the former Nazi State Secretary Werner Naumann, active in the Association of Refugees and Dispossessed Germans, BHE, which acted for German refugees and also former Nazis. The organization is a prominent political force in German politics today. From there, we'll get into some more interesting things, so I'll just put a little marker here, because I think this is actually a very good book so that people understand also how there's a number of American elements that through their actions you end up seeing how they actually had to have known a lot of this and then helped support it. And so remember, everybody who talks glowingly about the EU is either completely unaware of this or they absolutely know this. And especially if they're any kind of state outlet, no matter how charitable and nice and all this stuff, they know this stuff. And the best part about it is, soon I'm going to be able to read to you about some of these outlets, these information outlets. And that you're going to find out, oh, they were run by people who absolutely were definitely in the Nazi Third Reich, or they were in an allied National Socialist organization, and they just were put in charge of, like Air America, or they were put in charge, Oh, the one, oh, it's escaping me now. It'll come to me, but it still exists today. That it's like sort of this, yeah. I can't believe I'm forgetting it. But it's an international reporting arm for America, and it was, but yeah. And I mean, like Der Spiegel comes up in this, and BBC comes up in this, and so just I'll be reading more about these people who never really quite hung in Nuremberg and Into the Fire, and why America, and especially people who are conservatives, Christians, Republicans, libertarians, all should frown on the EU for more reason than just that it's centralized poor planning, but that it actually is developed on the idea of simply putting all in the state and making everything bow to the power of the state over the individual, over community, over local power, and really there's a reason why they try to erase culture as well, and then we'll just just do things, and there's nobody has any power against them. They say, well, it's the law, just like we were warned in oh man, just like we were warned by Hayek in Road to Serfdom, that rule of law doesn't mean much when all that law is meant to do is rule you. Have a good night. Don't trust anybody left of center.